Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is the Canon EF-M 32mm f1.4 STM, a standard prime lens for the EOS M mirrorless system, costing $479 or around 499 UK pounds. It delivers 51mm equivalent coverage, coupled with a fast focal ratio that's ideal for shallow depth of field effects. The 32mm f1.4 amazingly becomes only the 8th native EF-M lens in the 7 years since Canon launched the system. That's only around 1 lens per year, and it's also only the 3rd prime lens in the range so far. Indeed, as the first native prime to deliver standard coverage, it's a lens the EOS M faithful have been waiting a very long time for, but thankfully it doesn't disappoint. In this video, I'll show you what it can do and crucially how it compares to the EF-M 15-45mm kit zoom, which most EOS M owners will already have. If you find my reviews useful, give me a like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe to help support my channel. If you really like what I do, don't forget you can also treat me to a coffee or treat yourself to a copy of my in-camera book using the links below. Thanks, and on with the review. If you're considering the 32mm f1.4, chances are you already own one of the native kit zooms, like the EF-M 15-45mm on the right. So since the zoom already includes the 32mm focal length, what exactly are the benefits of each lens? Okay, first of all, let's look at the coverage at 32mm, which as you know becomes equivalent to around 50mm for a so-called standard field of view. I filmed this clip in 1080p on the EOS M50, so it's using the full sensor width. Now for the 15-45mm, which of course starts wider at an equivalent of 24mm, and it ends longer at an equivalent of 72mm, giving you greater compositional flexibility. So for general use, the zoom will be preferable to many owners. Beyond focal length though, the major difference between them is their maximum apertures, which in turn has a big impact on the quality in low light and also the potential for a shallow depth of field effect. I took this shot with the 15-45mm zoom at 32mm, where its maximum aperture becomes around f5. Now here's the same composition with the 32mm prime at f1.4, and the difference in the depth of field is obvious. I'll show you a video version of this in just a moment. At f1.4, the 32mm prime is also letting in almost 4 stops more light, which in turn allows much lower ISOs or faster shutter speeds, making it ideal for low light work. Indeed, the 32mm at f1.4 has the fastest or brightest aperture of all of the native EF-M lenses. Many people will be using this lens for portraits, so here's an example, again starting with a 15-45mm zoom at 32mm f5, that's the maximum aperture at this focal length on the zoom, and now for the same composition with the 32mm prime wide open at f1.4, and again you can really see the difference in the depth of field. If you like those nice blurred backgrounds, a lens with a large aperture, indicated by a small f number, is the way forward. Oh, and to illustrate the low light benefits of a brighter lens, in order to maintain a shutter speed of a 50th of a second in these two portrait shots, the 32mm at f1.4 used a sensitivity of 640 ISO, while the zoom at f5 was forced to use 6400 ISO, and that is a big difference in image quality. Now for a close look at the rendering of blurred areas, this time with the subject at the closest focusing distance to maximise the effect. Here's the lens wide open at f1.4, where the bokeh blobs are large and free of distracting onion rings. There's also minimal outlining, although more obviously the blobs towards the edges of the frame are rendered as oval, cat's eye shapes like American footballs or rugby balls, which you may or may not like. This is however fairly normal for large aperture lenses, and it can be mitigated by closing the aperture down a little. Here at f2, the ovals have become much more circular, although their outline is now influenced by the 7-blade diaphragm system, rendering them into heptagons. Again, you may or may not like this effect. This becomes more evident as you close the aperture further, first to f2.8, and especially one stop smaller to f4, as seen here. As the aperture is closed further to its minimum value of f16, the blobs of course become smaller still, but I'd say the results between f1.4 and 2.8 can actually look really good, although again as the diaphragm blades begin to close beyond the maximum aperture, their heptagon shape becomes quite clear. Next, a quick look at diffraction on bright sources of light. Here's the lens pointing at the sun at f4, and now at f5.6 where the hints of some spikes are emerging. At f8 they become better defined, with the 14 spikes revealing the 7-blade system inside the lens. This is an effective diffraction that you can use to create spikes on bright point sources. The best results for spikes are of course at the smallest apertures of f11 and on this lens now f16, although choosing these values will also reveal any marks on the lens or sensor. Next I wanted to compare the sharpness between the 32mm and the 15 to 45mm zoom, so I shot this wall with each lens at all apertures and took crops from the areas that I've marked with the red rectangles for a direct comparison. In each case I shot in RAW and processed the files without any correction profiles applied, so there's no correction in these results for vignetting, that's darkening in the corners, or for chromatic aberrations, that's coloured fringing, or for geometric distortion. I'll start with the crops from the far corner and begin with the 32mm in isolation at f1.4 where it's respectably sharp. With the aperture closed to stop to f2, the lens sharpens up further and any darkness in the corners is reduced, although this can be corrected easily by applying lens profiles. The results continue in isolation until the zoom can join in at f5.6 where I've pitched its crop on the right hand side. The difference in sharpness in the corners is quite obvious, and this is another typical benefit of shooting with a prime lens versus a zoom, particularly a kit zoom. Even as the aperture closes, the 32mm prime stays ahead in this regard, although you may notice they both exhibit different types of geometric distortion, a little barreling from the 32mm and a little pincushion from the zoom, at least when it's set to 32mm. Like vignetting though, this can be corrected fairly easily by applying profiles in RAW software or automatically for in-camera on JPEGs. And now for the results in the centre, again starting with the 32mm by itself, where even wide open without correction it delivers sharp high contrast results. By the time the zoom joins in at f5.6, you'll notice the 32mm on the left side delivering sharper results with higher contrast than the zoom. It's crisper and punchier overall throughout its aperture range. So again, switching from the kit zoom to the prime lens will yield sharper results across the frame, and that's something which you can't improve with lens corrections in software. Moving on, how about the build quality of both lenses? They look fairly similar from the outside, both sharing the same 61mm diameter of all EF-M lenses, but in your hands the 32mm feels more substantial. Both lenses are very light, but the zoom is almost half the weight and inevitably feels more plasticky. You will however notice a label on the zoom indicating it has image stabilization, a feature sadly lacking on the 32mm. The zoom also has a collapsing design, allowing it to retract to a shorter length when not in use. Taking a closer look at the 32mm specs, it measures 61mm in diameter, 57mm long, weighs 235 grams, has a 43mm filter thread, and sports a metal lens mount, unlike the plastic mount of the 15 to 45mm kit zoom, although I should add that none of the EF-M lenses to date go as far as actually having weather sealing. The optical construction consists of 14 elements in 8 groups, 7 diaphragm blades as you've already seen, and a closest focusing distance of 23 cm, similar to the 25 cm of the 15 to 45mm zoom. As I mentioned earlier, there's no optical stabilization, and at the time I made this video, no EOS M bodies had sensor stabilization either, so you'll need to use quick enough shutter speeds to avoid shake. In terms of focusing, the 32mm employs an STM system that operates in a fairly leisurely fashion. Here it is on the EOS M50 focusing from near to far and back again. If you're shooting portraits in a sequence, this is the kind of refocusing you can expect for a subject moving around the frame. This is at the M50's top burst speed when using servo AF, that's continuous autofocus, and face detection with this particular lens. It's not super fast, but it's good enough for casual situations like these. The focusing may not be suitable for tracking fast action, but is good enough for smooth racking during video. Here's the 32mm at f1.4 on the EOS M50 using the touchscreen to pull focus between near and far. And to illustrate the potential for a shallow depth of field again, here's the 15 to 45mm zoom in the same situation where at f5 there's clearly much less blurring. Now back to the 32mm at f1.4 where it'll keep up with someone walking towards the camera for video, using face tracking here on the EOS M50. The natural follow-up to this is to see how suitable the combination is for vlogging or filming pieces to camera. If you're interested in filming pieces to camera, here's how the EF-M 32mm f1.4 looks when filming 1080 25p video, mounted on an EOS M50 body, and I'm using the built-in microphones on the camera to record the audio. I have the lens aperture opened up to f1.4 of course, and this allows you to really nicely blur elements in the background even when they're only just behind me here. Now let's see what the camera looks like when it refocuses on me becoming a little bit closer, and listen out for any autofocus motor sounds. Okay, the effective focal length and the lack of optical stabilization rules this lens out for vlogging handheld. No one's going to use it for that. But as you can see here, if you've got the camera mounted on a tripod, it can be a really nice lens to use for filming those pieces to camera. Right, on with the video. Okay, now for a selection of sample images shot with a 32mm f1.4 on an EOS M50 body. They're all JPEGs out of camera, and if you want a closer look at any of them or my results, just head over to my full review of this lens at cameralabs.com. With an equivalent focal length of 51mm, this lens is described as capturing so-called standard coverage, neither wide nor compressed, but delivering natural looking results. This makes it a highly versatile general purpose option. Sure, like all prime lenses, you can't adjust the focal length, but the coverage allows you to capture everything from urban or natural landscapes to portraits or product shots, and personally speaking, I much prefer to zoom with my feet. The bright f1.4 focal ratio allows you to better blur the background than any native lens in the EF-M catalogue to date, and also operate in low light without bumping up the ISO too much. The minimum focusing distance may be similar to the 15 to 45mm kit zoom, but still lets you get sufficiently close to small subjects for it to be useful for food or product photography. Meanwhile, the optical quality ensures sharp details across the frame and well-behaved rendering. So compared to the 15 to 45mm kit zoom, it's sharper across the frame, has the potential to deliver much shallower depth of field effects, and it gathers almost 4 times more light, making it more suitable for low light work. What you lose though is the ability to zoom the focal length or have optical stabilization. The Canon EF-M 32mm f1.4 is arguably the most overdue lens of any modern system. Canon's kept the EOS M faithful waiting 7 years for a standard large aperture prime lens, a model that really should have been available from day one. But it's finally here and thankfully doesn't disappoint, delivering visibly sharper results across the frame than the kit zooms, while also offering far greater potential for shallow depth of field effects. There may be no image stabilization nor weather sealing, but this compact prime is a great general purpose lens that's also ideal for portraits, low light or still life. While the 32mm f1.4 is the first standard prime in the native EF-M mount though, there are alternatives if you're willing to adapt lenses. The closest is the Sigma 30mm f1.4 Art in the EF fit, matching the aperture although costing a tad more at $499. Then from Canon there's the EF35mm f2.IS, a stop slower, a little heavier and slightly more expensive at $549, but sporting image stabilization and compatibility with full frame bodies if you're thinking of upgrading. I should also add, if you simply want the cheapest way to blur backgrounds on portraits, just get yourself the Canon EF50mm f1.8 STM for about $125 and use it with an adapter on your EOS M camera. Looking outside the system for a comparison of values, Sigma makes another 30mm f1.4 non-art lens that's native to the Sony E-mount or Micro Four Thirds system, which sells for a more affordable $339. That's more like it. I wish this and the other APS-C Sigma lenses were available in native Canon EF-M and Fujifilm X versions. It's also revealing to compare Canon's RF 35mm f1.8 IS macro for its full-frame EOS R mirrorless system, which at $449 is actually a tad cheaper than the APS-C EF-M 32mm. And while it's optically a little bit slower, it is a full-frame lens, and it includes image stabilization too. Shame it can't be adapted to the EOS M system. But before you think the EF-M 32mm f1.4 is slightly on the expensive side at $479, console yourself that Fujifilm's XF 35mm f1.4, another native APS-C mirrorless lens, actually costs more at $599. That said, if you exclude the EF-M 18 to 150mm super zoom, the EF-M 32mm f1.4 becomes the most expensive EF-M lens to date, but equally, it's the only one with an f1.4 focal ratio. As a fan of bright, fixed focal length prime lenses, I of course fell for it, although you may be able to satisfy your creative desires more cheaply with the EF-M 22mm f2 or the EF-M 28mm f3.5 macro, both for under $250, or an adapted EF 50mm f1.8 STM for even less. But if you desire standard coverage equivalent to 50mm or thereabouts with a fast aperture, there's only one native option for the EOS M cameras. It's the 32mm 1.4, and it offers a better overall experience than an adapted lens. In short, the EF-M 32mm f1.4 may not be a casual purchase, but it remains the best choice for EOS M owners who desire standard coverage and great creative control with a native lens. The only major downside is it should have been available 7 years earlier at the launch of the EOS M system, but at least it's here now. Right, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you're feeling extra generous, consider a coffee donation, or of course treating yourself to my in-camera book. The links are below this video. Thanks, and see you next time. Bye bye.